Other countries have freedom of faith, and they don't have those documents, and they also often don't have as many Christian nationalists. It's very fascinating. So I just want to invite us to consider, you might, I'm not saying you are, but you might be a Christian nationalist if you think our Declaration or Constitution are eternal principles that need not be changed.
Welcome to Theology Curator, a podcast hosted by Kurt Willems and available online at theologycurator.com. Each episode looks at a theological, formational, or cultural theme. We might dig into the life and letters of a radical Jewish teacher named Paul, converse about a pressing contemporary issue, reflect on the nature of following Jesus today, or even attempt to remedy doom and gloom preaching with a good old-fashioned dose of hope. This show is an invitation to build bridges between the first century world of the earliest Christ followers into the 21st century reality we now inhabit. The Jesus we excavate from the rubble of tradition might just surprise us all.
Welcome back to Theology Curator. I'm Kurt Willems, excited to have you here. And we are doing part 2 of Jesus Politics. This is going to be an ongoing series leading up to and possibly slightly after the election. We'll see how it all pans out, but at least 10 episodes, if not more. So expect to find lots of them. And I just wanted to let you know, if this is your first time listening or you haven't listened to part 1 of the series, I definitely recommend going back, listening to that one first, and then hopping into this one. In a lot of ways, they're going to end up building on each other. And so that might be very helpful. And if you're interested in the subject, why not, right? Get to do 2 episodes that way. Today, I want to let you know about the format, and this is going to be the format most of the time. We are going to look at the topic of the day or whatever. So today's topic, of course, I'll step into that in a teaching format. And then at the end, I'm going to bring in a friend named Tony Scarcella, who is someone that is just a dear friend. And he and I are going to converse about the teaching and the subjects therein to kind of add a little conversational element to these episodes. So with that, I want to invite you in. Let's start the teaching. At the time of recording, I just watched a soap opera, a weird drama, something just that felt like another world. What did I watch? The first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Let me tell you, it was absolutely ridiculous on so many levels. And you can imagine why. There was interruptions constantly. There was childish banter. I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot. And, you know, I have my opinions. I am thoroughly frustrated with this president. I do not think he is someone that, as a Christian, I feel called to support. You may differ with me on that for a variety of reasons. So I want you to know that I respect you and do not discount your contribution to the kingdom, but would also invite you to help us see why, because right now it's really hard to see. But I want to really just center us not on my opinions, because that's really not what this series is about. I want to center us on Scripture and what the Bible has to say about politics in general, and hopefully it gives us more and more categories for how to think about our political season that we find ourselves in and what to do about it. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to first and foremost talk about Christian nationalism. So there's a lot of ways to talk about Christian nationalism. You know, some people try and make a distinction between patriotism and nationalism, for instance. In other words, you can be patriotic, you can love your country wherever you happen to live, and you can be all in on your country insofar that it amplifies your Christian faith, and where it doesn't, you know, you navigate that. So there are some people who would say, I'm a Christian and I'm patriotic. I love my culture, etc. Then there's some who would probably say all of those things, but would actually fall into something called nationalism. And I'm very uncomfortable with nationalism because I believe that the New Testament is very uncomfortable with nationalism. And personally, I'm not all that patriotic in a lot of ways, but that's a different topic for a different day. So what do I want to start us with? Well, I want to talk about a book that gives a few categories that I think are helpful just for thinking about. This is a book that it's been out for a while, so it's not a new book. It's called Hidden Worldviews, 8 Cultural Stories That Shape Our Lives, written by authors Wilkins and Sanford. And what they do is they talk about the cultural story of nationalism. And so you might be a Christian nationalist if, is how I'm going to frame this, a little Jeff Foxworthy style from the 90s or whatever. So here are my you might be a Christian nationalist if ideas. And these actually are straight up ideas that come from their book. I think it's super helpful. They say you might be a Christian nationalist if, and here's one idea they bring to the table, you believe that God's plan for history would be severely hampered if the United States did not exist in 100 years, 25 years, or even next year. Whoa. Yeah, I mean, think about it for a moment. Many people believe, and I believed at one point, that the United States plays an instrumental role in God's kingdom plan for the cosmos. And I've just got to say, God can use anything. God uses the nations, there's no doubt. But if we think that Christian nation equals United States, we've got another story we need to tell. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit because, my friends, there has never been a truly Christian nation. It just is impossible for a variety of reasons. And we'll talk more about those. So if you're worried about this country being the last beacon of hope for the Christian faith, my friends, there is so much to the story that we need to talk about beyond the reality that the global South is booming with Christian influence and God is at work doing miraculous things in other parts of the world that don't look like us, talk like us, but have the same spirit. So you might be a Christian nationalist if, here's another one, number 2. You find it unthinkable that a citizen would not be able to pledge allegiance to the flag or sing the national anthem for religious reasons. You know, when I grew up, this was big because I remember having a student or two in a class that was part of a religion called Jehovah's Witness. That's not I don't consider that to be a Christian sect or a Christian denomination. It's just not Christianity. It's not Orthodox Christianity at all. However, there are a few things that I've said to my Jehovah's Witness visitors that I think I actually agree with. One of which is not pledging allegiance to country or flag. Why is that? Well, it seems to me that we easily slip into an idolatry. We make an idol of our flag and the idea of our flag. We make an idolatry of our idea of what country is or isn't. These are all things we really got to think about. And maybe you disagree with my characterization of those things as idolatry, but here's the deal. If you think it's unfathomable why someone like me would actually question those things, you might be a Christian nationalist, and it might be something you need to sit with and ponder with Jesus. Because I have a very strong feeling that if Jesus saw any of his followers pledging allegiance to the kingdom of Rome, that he would rebuke it. There is no doubt in my mind. And so I want to just invite you to consider that for a moment, and then I'll offer you number 3. Number 3 is you think that our Declaration of Independence embodies eternal principles or that the Constitution should never be changed. Well, my friends, I've seen this portrayed in all kinds of different situations. I remember a piece of art that I saw, and I always mess up the artist's name, but he's pretty well known for doing art that is very right-wing, religious. I think he maybe is even Mormon, but it's very evangelical friendly for some conservative evangelicals. And in this art piece that came out maybe 10 years ago, it had Jesus in the center of all of these sort of political figures portrayed as either negative or positive from U.S. history. And he was holding the Declaration of Independence, and it was kind of like glowing. And you had the idea, based on his descriptions at the time on the website, you could actually hover and see descriptions that this document, as he called it, was inspired by God. I mean, my goodness, I didn't know that there was anything inspired by God but the sacred scriptures that we have in the Bible. So this, my friend, should be a huge red flag. If your feelings about the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution are foundational rooting documents that mound or build up your identity, I would invite you to consider, why in the world do you have so much passion about these? And you might say, well, because it gives me freedom of faith. Well, here's the thing. Other countries have freedom of faith, and they don't have those documents, and they also often don't have as many Christian nationalists. It's very fascinating. So I just want to invite us to consider, you might, I'm not saying you are, but you might be a Christian nationalist if you think our Declaration or Constitution are eternal principles that need not be changed. Here's the fourth one. You believe, right? You might be a Christian nationalist if you believe that our nation would finally be okay if it would just get back to how it was at some earlier stage of our history. Here's the thing. Our country has never been anything ideal. No country has ever been anything ideal. This is something we need to really own. We need to really let that sink in. We have heard over and over again since at least my infancy, if not sooner, or further back, that Christianity needs to take center stage again, or that we need to get this nation back for God, or back then things were better. Back then Americans ... respected, believed in, our founders were all Christians and this was a Christian. Here's the thing. Over and over again, it's been demonstrated that if you go backwards, you're not going to see more Christianity in the Jesus sense. You're going to see civil religion. You're going to see things that mix categories all over the place. God and country mingling interestingly in ways that especially people who are white identified with. And here's the thing. That's not Christianity. That's a civil religion that borrows from Christianity. It's very interesting. I mean, we talk about in some of those documents that God gave inalienable rights. Interestingly, the founding fathers couldn't even agree on what God meant. I mean, many of them were deists. They didn't even believe in anything remotely orthodox. And so why do we invest so much value in something that Thomas Jefferson wouldn't even recognize compared to us who follow Jesus? Like, this is not even the same God. He held to something that was radically not Christianity. It was detached from the Christian story, even if it was sourced from Christian ideas. And so I just want to say there's no idyllic age. And in fact, we have to be extra honest and go back and say, what about the fact that for 400 years, Black folks have been treated terribly in this country? Especially in conditions of slavery and after Reconstruction and into the Civil Rights era and now into situations where folks don't feel safe. I mean, the reality is there's never been a place where Black people in this country or indigenous people in this country or other people of color in this country could go backwards and say, oh, it used to be so good. America used to be so good to all of us. And if we could only get back there, the truth is that that's a very nationalist idea, that there's some sort of glory years that are getting corrupted. It just isn't true. And so I want to just caution us that if we want to avoid Christian nationalism, we need to be aware of these impulses that for many of us, especially those of us who grew up in very conservative environments, we have to be willing to ask the question, like, do I really believe that the United States is integral to God's plan for the universe? And I just have to say, I hope not. I mean, no, God's bigger than the United States. We see that all the time. And, if I have a problem with citizens not saluting the flag or not singing the national anthem because that's their religious belief, especially as followers of Jesus, I need to ask the question, am I a Christian nationalist? If I put a lot of value into the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, I've got to ask the same question, just as I need to ask the question if I am trying to get America back for God or go back to the glory years or anything like that. And so that, my friends, is what I wanted to bring up about Christian nationalism, because I think Jesus says quite a bit about this in various ways. One of the ways that he does this is very important for us to understand. He talks about this in the book of Luke, is one place we can find it. We can source it. And we're going to come back to this in the next episode in a bunch of ways. But here's what's fascinating. Luke sets us up. Basically, Jesus is going to be asked a question that's supposed to trick him. And this question is going to lead to a deeper revelation that we need to really look at and own. And here's the question. And then I'm going to pose the question. I'm going to read the passage. And then this is exactly where we're going to move to in our next episode. But here's the passage in Luke chapter 20, verses 20 through 26. I'll read out of the Common English Bible. This is what it says. The legal experts and their chief priests were watching Jesus closely and sent spies who pretended to be sincere. They wanted to trap him in his word so they could hand him over to the jurisdiction and authority of the governor. They asked him, "Teacher, we know that you are correct in what you say and teach. You don't show favoritism, but teach God's way as it really is." Here's a question. Does the law, meaning the Jewish law, the Torah, does the law allow people to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Since Jesus recognized their deception, he said to them, "Show me a coin. Whose image and inscription does it have on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. He said to them, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." They couldn't trap him in his words in front of the people. Astonished by his answer, they were speechless. So here we have a scenario where Jesus is asked, do we pay taxes? And here's what's fascinating, and we'll unpack this more in the next episode, but just think about this passage through the lens of Christian nationalism for a minute before I give you why it's not that. Through the lens of Christian nationalism and through the lens of this sort of worldview that I inherited, this passage has been used to split up reality, to basically make secular and sacred divides so that we can sort of have two hats on and still honor God in a way. This is what it basically is broken down as. Jesus says, like, hey, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. So pay your taxes, do your civic duty. But then we've extended it, right? The narrative had this whole story built into it. Defend your country is giving to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Honoring our traditions as Americans, saluting the flag, believing that the Constitution must be upheld as good and right and God's source of energy for this good United States, that we must go back to the glory days. I mean, all of that was loaded in Jesus' response to give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. It's really fascinating. This one passage has fueled this idea of Christian nationalism, and we don't even necessarily recognize it because some of us are from a situation where, in fact, this was just common sense thinking. So what do I do about if I ever get enlisted into the United States Army? Well, Jesus says that we give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. You know, it's really interesting if I were to think about this, and here I said I wasn't going to break down the logic, but I think I just want to throw this in here right now. Again, would Jesus be like, go for it, go join Rome's army? I mean, just go have a good time conquering, raping, and pillaging throughout the known world, causing devastation and suffering wherever the army goes. And, somehow that's your duty. You're honoring the great empire that you happen to be a part of. No way. I mean, there is no universe within which Jesus says, you cannot be my disciple unless you enlist in the Roman army. Like, it's never going to happen. Now, he has some interactions with people that are connected to the Roman army, but that is a different storyline. And so I just want to bring up that we have a storyline in parts of Christian fundamentalism and evangelicalism. And I lump myself in here for many years, where give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar meant so much more than I think Jesus means by it. And of course, the other half of that verse, give to God what belongs to God, that was our spiritual thing, right? So we could take a passage like the Sermon on the Mount, and it says, love your enemies. Well, that's giving to God what belongs to God. So in your very personal interactions with people that are right in front of you, that are making your life difficult, that challenging coworker, that neighbor that's unkind, that person who bullies you, you are called to love those people. But we don't necessarily need to apply that same kind of enemy love to giving to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Because when we're wearing our Caesar hat, when we are conscripted into war, we do the war thing. And then when we are doing the God thing, we do the God thing. But here's the thing. Jesus never is trying to split things into secular, Caesar, and sacred, God. There's no doubt in my mind, and we're going to break that down, but our impulse towards Christian nationalism has trained us to think in these sorts of ways. And so, my friends, as we close this portion of our conversation, I want to just invite us to consider, what ways have Christian thought kind of mingled with nationalism, and how does it inform the way we think about our duty as citizens in a country like this? And what would Jesus invite us to think differently about? How might Jesus challenge our impulses towards nationalism, towards this obedience to country, this obsession with our political system and our various sorts of rituals? I want to invite us to consider that, and we'll continue to talk about it in upcoming episodes. You just heard a teaching from me about politics and Jesus and all that good stuff. And right now I have Tony Scarcella with me. He is a dear friend and the author of a book that I just really love. And I'm going to keep talking about your book. I know it's over the top sometimes, but man, that book you wrote, Regenerate, I think is just so important right now. So all of that to say, he's here with me, and we're going to just process some thoughts and try and have a little bit of an organic, barely planned conversation. So he kind of prepared some questions based on the teaching, and I don't even know what those are. So I may be like, a bunch of times, but whatever. This is good. What's up, Tony?
Hey, man. You might be a Christian nationalist if...
Boom.
There it is.
What's my first one? My first one would be first to come to my head. If, you marched in Charlottesville? I don't know.
That was way more charitable than you could have been there.
Yeah. No,
you're Jeff Foxworthy. Does that make me Larry the Cable Guy?
Oh, totally does. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. You're stuck.
I'll end up making than you later on, so that's fine.
Fair enough.
Thanks for having me back on the show, dude.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. It's really cool to have a conversation partner like this. It's great. Yeah.
I loved You Might Be a Christian Nationalist If. Thought there was a lot of really good stuff in there. I have some questions for you right out of the gate after listening.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Does the United States have... You talk about how the United States doesn't have a privileged role in God's cosmic work. And I kind of travel in circles where, because I'm an Foursquare evangelical pastor, some circles there would be some strong disagreements with that. Why don't you unpack that a little more and kind of defend your argument there? Because I agree with you, but I want to hear more about that.
Have you ever read the book Left Behind? I made you choke, didn't I? He was drinking water. You don't see that, but he was drinking water as I asked him a question. Okay, so you have.
Triggered, yeah. I read it.
Yeah, triggered as well. So, so in the book Left Behind, here's what's really fascinating to me. And I didn't get through the whole series, but I read the first couple when I was in high school. And what I recall from that, the bad guys are never the United States. Isn't that really interesting? So that to me is very fascinating, that in certain pockets of Christian thought, the United States is always like this divine agent when it does the right thing according to a particular theological thread. You know, and so one of the things that I have noticed is when people start saying the U.S. has this role and Trump is like, you know, whoever the ancient king in Israel was, or what, you know, or the foreign king, or who is the example? Do you know?
One I hear a lot.
Cyrus? Yeah.
But those are just for the people who are willing to concede he might not actually be a Christian.
Yeah.
Most of them are adamant that he is a Christian, but the ones who will concede he's not will say, well, he's like Cyrus. God's using him to execute our purposes.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because I think we would have to ask the question then, in Jesus's day, who were those people? Like, were there people that they could look around and say, these leaders, kings, people in authority, emperors, military people, these are the ones executing God's A, B, or C. And I don't think you have very clear examples of that ever in the New Testament. You do have Jesus praising, a military leader at one point as kind of this like radical example of like, look, you folks who are supposed to have it all together, Israel, you're missing it. And this outsider, who is the most outside that you could possibly be, I mean, not only a Roman, but a Roman soldier tasked with making sure that we don't get out of line, so to speak. Like, I mean, this is like the worst of this is, besides Samaritans, you have Roman soldiers, right? Yeah. Like in ancient Jerusalem, etc. Like this is a big deal. And so the flow of the story really is, hey, if this outsider gets it, you better get it. Not that this is just a common example of the kind of person that can totally be a Jesus person. I think if that person really followed Jesus, there would be some real curiosity. I would have real curiosity about how those conversations would unfold, you know, but this is just one moment. So beyond those that come up, I mean, people highlight those. There's really no positive story about Rome. There's no positive story about anything having to do with the government. I mean, even Israel's own governmental leaders are just considered a mess, corrupt. The political parties of the day are a mess. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, you know, these are all, everything that you read in the Gospels and in Acts, it's so politically loaded, but we spiritualize it. And so when people say, but the United States is special because God, ... I want to ask, what did God do here that was so special? Are you talking about enslaving people from another continent and then making their lives terrible for 400 years? Like, I don't see any golden age in that looked like the kingdom, or fighting native people until their populations dwindled and then their property rights basically become non-existent, and to this day have the highest suicide rates because they have been under-resourced, underappreciated, and generationally sinned against. I mean, so we then just have to ask, like, what do we do?
Yeah, they're also the most likely to be trafficked and victims of sexual assault by far of any demographic in our country.
That's news to me, but it's not a surprise, unfortunately, right? It's crazy. I mean, there is no. When we start to say, but America's going to do these things for God, we are missing the transnational nature of what Jesus did. I mean, there's neither Jew nor Greek. That means something in the New Testament. When it's said over and over again, these are like two different kinds of people that Jesus and Paul and all the apostles and teachers in the New Testament are all saying they belong together. And if that's true, then we can't align ourselves with one particular place. We have to align ourselves with all places. And if we're going to align ourselves with all places, then how is the United States this unique vehicle for God's work in the world? Now, have we done good things because of the United States and some of those foundational principles? Absolutely. I love living here. I'm happy to be an American. I don't know if the proud word is that's a pretty strong word, but I'm happy to be an American. But I don't think that it makes me set up uniquely to be on God's side or something like that. I think that's a extra biblical idea that we need to really purge out of our spiritual imagination.
But Kurt, the U.S. reestablished Israel as its own sovereign. And that means that if the U.S. reestablished Israel as its own sovereign nation, then we are pretty much Israel also. So we are the greatest nation in the world.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I might just be dumb. No,
as hell, but I hear that a lot. I mean, that's especially in more Pentecostal circles. What do you say to that?
Again, it's all tied back to that left behind theological mentality, isn't it? I mean, isn't that fascinating? A lot of the nationalistic Christian threads that I hear from people that I love. I mean, there are some godly people that have thoroughly missed the boat on nationalism, at least patriotism, we'd say maybe, and specifically end times theology. Like they're letting that system that's a couple hundred years old drive a whole worldview, so that we have Palestinian Christians in the Holy Land who are holding their hands up in the sky and saying, Christians in America, notice us. We're your sisters and brothers. We believe in Jesus with you. And these folks who are running the Jewish government are not treating us right. And they're not even Jesus people. And you're siding with them? Like, you see, like, it's so complex. And I think what we need to understand is that if the kingdom of God is international, then we have to have everyone's flourishing on our mind, not just the flourishing of one place. Now, I do believe that in some way, shape, or form, at the end, that there will be a group of folks who are Jewish that will see Jesus finally fully revealed and say, that is actually the Messiah. We were wrong. We repent, and we want to be part of the eschatological kingdom. I think there is a unique invitation in Romans 9 through 11 for something like that. But there are not like two distinct peoples of God, and therefore we have to always favor the Jewish state or the Israeli state as though it's God's special nation. That is an overreach of what the Bible teaches from a New Testament perspective.
That's good. That's good. That's really helpful. That will not fly with most of my Pentecostal friends, but I am 100% in agreement with you.
Well, isn't it so funny? Because I feel like there is a missing thread in some Pentecostal theology. If they could get rid of their eschatology of evacuation, rapture, etc., and replace it with the inaugurated kingdom of God that is here and will be here when Jesus returns to heal, restore, purge, and resurrect, all the theological pieces of the Pentecostal stream start to fall into place. Why do we pray for healing? Well, because in the new creation, there's no sickness. Why do we pray for healing? Because in the new creation, we are given restored physical bodies. We're not ghosts. You don't need to be healed if you're a ghost, but you need to be healed if you have a physical body. And resurrection says your body matters now and your body will matter then. And so, to my Pentecostal friends that are still swimming in the dispensational theology zone, I just invite you to consider, what if there's actually a more robust biblical theology that actually accentuates your passions for the inbreaking spiritual goodness that comes through the gifts of the Spirit, etc. So anyway, that's a tangent, but it's there.
I have to say, to piggyback off that tangent, as a diehard Pentecostal myself, once you can embrace a better eschatological theology, I don't know that there's a more empowering stream of Christianity you could be swimming in.
Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah.
So,
and I was just going to say, as a closet charismatic myself who dabbles therein, but not all the way at times, I appreciate that. That's really cool. Yeah.
Where do you think we see this birth of Christian nationalism taking place, specifically in our country, because we have so many quote unquote Christians in our country. We are immersed in Christian nationalism. how is it that there is so much Christian nationalism and so many Christians if Christian nationalism is such a step away from Jesus?
Oh, wow. Yeah. This is a historical conversation now because we look at the first few centuries of Christianity, post-resurrection, and what you have is a massive movement of people. It becomes pretty big. Mm-hmm. And as it grows, it's brought under persecution under several different emperors. Sometimes it's chill and sometimes it's really bad. But they keep growing anyway. And it wasn't because they aligned themselves with the state. It was actually they were the victims of the state. And it's a commitment to peace. It's a commitment to nonviolence. You see it all throughout the literature. There's a couple of exceptions, but they're outliers. They're not kind of the main thread. Yeah. And, this holds up for the version of abortion that was practiced in the ancient times. The Christians were universally against that, universally against joining military service. I mean, just straight up would not give their allegiance to the empire in any way. And that changes under Constantine, of course. And Ron Sider has the best book on this, The Early Church on Killing, where it's laid out and it's nuanced. I mean, it's really important. And from there, we just fast forward through church history, and violence becomes something that's okay, depending on who's in power. The mystics are like, nah, we're going to do the Sermon on the Mount thing. St. Francis is like, nah, I'm a Sermon on the Mount guy. But like there are these radical women and men who do the Jesus thing, and there's the power structures that flex for power, and violence is all over the place. By the time you get to like modern history, Europeans come to this country and they come under the banner of finding new lands to conquer. And then they do that. They bring more people over here from the African continent to do all the hard work and, kill a lot of indigenous people in the process. I mean, it's just awful. And then we get to this pivotal moment where these are colonies of England that now have to decide, are we going to be colonies of England or are we going to be our own nation? And they decide to go to war. And this is what's so fascinating. They go to war against fellow Christians. Think about that. They're literally fighting a nationalistic cause against other Christians with a nationalistic cause. Both, I mean, some of these folks are Anglican, right? So imagine just that one connection, because in England, that's a big deal, right? So imagine the Anglican church in England and the Episcopal version of it here. And they're reading the same prayers every Sunday, the same prayer book. They have the Book of Common Prayer. They have the same apostolic succession of bishops. I mean, they have all of that the same. And yet they are fighting each other. And they're both followers of Christ. How do you do that, and call that Christian? Well, you do that because you've justified nation over Jesus. And there could be a lot of reasons people would say, well, England wasn't being very Christian, so we showed them what Christian was. You could do all of that, but the truth of the matter is the criteria for just war theory wasn't even met for the Revolutionary War. And this has been demonstrated by multiple scholars. I mean, it's controversial when you say that, but it's actually not controversial when you look at the evidence. Mm-hmm. Now, were there injustices done to the colonists? Yeah, of course there were. But as far as like classical Augustinian just war theory, which is pretty restrained by modern standards, we United States people were like, we'll fight them, whatever. We want our rights. It's that same impulse that says today we want our rights. We need our rights whenever we're offended. And so Christian nationalism has been there for a long time. It just morphs into what it needs to be for that season of time. And so I would say the nationalism of now, really the version of the Christian right that we see, really gets born out of the controversial election between Reagan and Jimmy Carter. Yeah. Yep. And that's where everything starts to really shift. And, I'll talk about that somewhere. And is that in this episode? I'm trying to remember. I might have already said that. But depending on which episode, that shift is a big deal, because me being born in 1983, I'm born into a world post Jimmy Carter and that shift. So
Right.
I don't even know that there's I don't know that there's a Christian blue collar left-ish thing that was evangelical and accepted. I don't know that. I just know this one version. So yeah, nationalism, I think it shows up in a lot of ways, and we have to be willing to call it out in each other and in ourselves.
So pretty recently I was having dinner with a close family friend, and we're having dinner, and she's telling me about this sermon that her pastor gave at her church, and he showed this video on YouTube, and she actually had me watch the video of this kid who's homeschooled, and his parents take him to the beaches of Normandy. Are you familiar with this video? It was trending on YouTube for a while.
I'm clearly not as cool as you and your friend. No, I have no idea.
This isn't very cool. This kid's homeschooled, and he's a World War II fanatic, and he has to do some sort of presentation project, and his family's very wealthy. And so they take him to the beaches of Normandy, and he wears this. He's a 12-year-old kid, and they have him buy him like authentic World War II uniform and dress him up as a soldier. And he stands at the beaches of Normandy. And then it says that he saw the spirits of the soldiers who had died there, and he stands there saluting. And so this kid is standing there saluting, and I think he was there for like 12 hours. And people were coming up and taking pictures with him, and he goes in and out of crying, and the only time he moves is to change arms, to which he's saluting. And it just, point of it is like, look how connected to the spirit of America this kid is, and what a hope for patriotism in the future. And this person I was talking to, she's tearing up as she says, when I see stuff like that, it makes me grateful for what God can do with this generation, because it's not all us. Like, look at this kid right here. He's clearly a God-fearing kid. And I say this because the connection between like robust patriotism and like Christ-likeness were so connected that when she watched this video that had nothing to do with Jesus at all, it brought up the same like holy, reverent awe and emotion inside of her. And I didn't know what to say. For me, it was like a disconcerting, unsettling moment. And it was very clearly like a picture of what nationalism probably most looks like in the day to day. Like, most nationalists aren't the ones marching in Charlottesville, and they're not the ones who are like saying the Jews will not replace us and other anti-Semitic slurs and racial slurs. They're the ones who think that patriotism and Christ-likeness are absolutely synonymous. And I guess I want to ask you, like, where do you even start guiding a person outside of that deep marriage?
Wow.
I just threw a ton at you.
Oh, well, I didn't know about this video. So let me ask you a clarifying question just about the video. Were you being a little facetious when you said the kid saw the spirits of the dead soldiers? Like, he said he literally saw them?
Yep. He saw the spirits of the dead soldiers on Normandy. So then you can add witchcraft or something on top of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm open to all kinds of things. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to limit the way the heavenly and earthly realms intersect and do things. But that doesn't sound very familiar when I think of like the Christian story. I mean, just that one detail alone, and I kind of feel conservative saying this, but like that feels very witchcrafty or pagan-y. And I don't even know if I have a category for that part of it. So that's a big deal that should alarm us. You know, I do think that, in Eastern contexts, they do have this ancestral connectivity. Even Christians talk about that. And I don't want to dismiss that as possible, but my initial response is at least this, and I'd be open to having a different conversation about it. But that said, the interlocking of patriotism and Jesusism, we'll call it, dude, it's so connected that I don't even know where to start anymore, except with those people who are willing to say they might be wrong on something, or they're curious. Like for me, it's curiosity that is the invitation. And so if someone is willing to give you voice in their life, and willing to hear why this rubs you a different way, then there's an open door for you to just share your heart. I think that's usually the most opportune time just to share it, you know, and people may not agree with you when you're done, but at least you have been able to say, but what about, you know, because it is hard to untangle things that have been tangled up your whole life, you know, and when it's coming from a pastor, it reinforces it. And so, look, on the one hand, I want to say, hey, if you're a soldier or, you know, your grandpa was a soldier or something, I have no doubt that this is this takes some real positive character qualities to do these sorts of things. Within your worldview, there's something there to admire. However, I don't see Jesus taking up swords. I don't see Jesus affirming that impulse. And so could you do something more kingdom-like with that courage? You know, I wish we could have those conversations. But I think storytelling is by far the first place that I want to start, and opening doors for curious conversation that doesn't have to be heated, doesn't have to go too far too fast, because most people don't change their minds that naturally. And also for us who have our opinions, being willing to hold out sorts of, resolutions to God. In other words, we're not going to fix this. This isn't our job to fix, but we can speak into it, speak truth here, and allow outcomes to be what outcomes are, and still see this person we disagree with as a child of God who is wrong in this particular area. And hopefully God will work on that particular area, just like I have areas that need a lot of work, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, it was one of those moments where I was clearly being let in on something that was very valuable and personal to her. And, you know, if I wasn't a Jesus follower, I would have been honored by it. But there was just this thing that came up inside of me that was so unsettled by the whole ordeal.
Oh, it's unsettling. And what has that kid been taught all these years to envision such a spectacle and to physically stand there for so long? I mean, that, you can love something and not idolize it. Yeah. There are a lot of things in this world that I love that I don't idolize. And why does my country deserve my idolatry, essentially? Like, why does my country deserve allegiance? That's a big word we hear tossed around. Yeah. I think Jesus deserves my allegiance. I think my country deserves my best for the neighbor. You know, what can I give? How can I be a good neighbor? My country deserves that from me. And the best way I know how to go about that is by trying to learn from and follow Jesus with other people. Yeah,
that's good. So just to summarize that section, because I do want to move to this talk of allegiance, violence, this concession to allow violence into the life of a Christian seems to be the pathway towards Christian nationalism as we understand it. Would you agree with that?
I think so. Yeah. I think the violence thing is a huge deal. Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's move towards allegiance. You talk about you might be a nationalist if you talk about how you won't pledge allegiance to the flag or won't pledge allegiance to your country. And I know people who would say, well, that's being a bad witness, because what about all the people who they are diehard Republicans and aren't Christians, and if they see you not pledge allegiance to the flag, they're going to not want anything to do with you or your cause. Can you bring us back to a more biblical understanding of the word allegiance and how that informs your view?
Yeah, I think that's a really huge deal. When we think about ideas like allegiance, we're being invited to recognize the fact that Jesus is Lord. Now, all of the political rhetoric we see in the Roman Empire, we see a bunch of it sprinkled into the New Testament and being subverted. So the word good news is, and this is going to be review for a lot of people, but the word good news is a term that the Roman emperor would have proclaimed about himself, on his birthday oftentimes, right? Like good news, Caesar has done all of these things and has secured ... And now you have peace, right? It's all propaganda language. You have the same thing for words like grace, for repent, I mean, there's all of these words that are used in the Roman lexicon of empire that the New Testament takes up and says, oh no, like this is about Jesus. And you can't say those things and not wonder why, like I did a sermon a couple of weeks ago. We were looking at Acts. I think it was Acts chapter 16. I might have my reference wrong, but there's this point where people are angry at Paul. And so they come out and they're like, look, these guys are causing all kinds of problem because they like proclaim a different king, namely Jesus. Right.
Yep.
And it's fascinating because we don't have that happen here. We don't have that sort of tension. But the early Jesus people were known for sticking it to anything that wasn't Jesus himself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's got to be our mode. But so much of our national language has said just enough about God that Christians can assume it's their God that's being named, even though the people who wrote these documents a lot of them were not Orthodox Christians. I mean, you look at Thomas Jefferson, right? I mean, here's a guy who had to cut up a Bible and take out all the miracles just so he could even read it. I mean, that's crazy. Like, there's nothing Christian about that. When you start taking scissors to a Bible, you are no longer honoring the Orthodox Christian tradition. Yeah. And by the way, Orthodox meaning just the big tent of Christianity from Jesus forward, not like necessarily the Eastern Church, although they're on the team. I'm good with that. But my point being, she wrote words like God, endows, creator, endow, and everyone in my sphere of influence has always been like, oh yeah, because we're a Christian nation. Yeah. No, we're not. Like our allegiance is to King Jesus. And it took me years to understand that. But you only have to look at the world of the New Testament to realize that if anyone gave their allegiance to anything else but Jesus, it was called out. And in fact, there's moments where, people have to decide between continuing to worship the idols of the empire and following Jesus. And that's a hard place. Now, again, it's muddy here because there's so much God language. There's so much like civil religion that looks almost Christian enough, but it's not actually Christian. It's civil religion. And so that's, for me, we're called to be the contrast, and anything that is a parody of of what we're called to be, we can't endorse it. And so we don't have to be like, oh, this is so bad over here. But we definitely shouldn't be, I'm going to give my life to this. Like, I'm not going to give my life to the American machine. I'm going to give my life to the revolutionary Jesus who gave his life for everyone. That's where I want to give my life. And
that's when Christianity becomes dangerous in the best possible sense.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you've said this on your show before. I mention it in my book. There's nothing about telling people you're going to heaven when you die that's threatening to the Roman Empire, or even like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, especially right. Because they did believe in an afterlife.
Yeah.
What is threatening is when you say, actually, Donald Trump's not my president. Jesus is my president. And so Trump tells me that I can't shelter refugees or I can't shelter immigrants in my home. As a follower of Jesus, I gotta kind of stick it to Trump and shelter him in here, even if it means I go to jail.
Which is what people did under the Nazi regime, right? I mean, that we honor that now. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, but please keep going. Yeah.
But I just think that the reason we have such a detached from our body faith, almost more Gnosticism than Christianity in our culture today, is so that we can continue to support the nationalist narrative, the Christian nation. The moment that our faith has to live in our bodies and our faith has to be actually following Jesus and the way of Jesus is the moment you can't really keep that marriage between nationalism and empire. It has to go.
Yeah.
Masters. And I think we intrinsically, even if we're choosing the wrong master, we know we're choosing the wrong master. So we have to build up all these barriers around to reinforce the choices that we're making.
Oh, dude, that's so insightful. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we do so many mental, emotional, spiritual gymnastics around those dynamics that it gets twisted up and we don't know left from right. No, actually we do. We it's usually right. But you know what I'm saying? Like we don't know Jesus from our identity that we've built around all this other stuff. And yeah, I think you absolutely nail it. And it's why I really wanted to have early on in this series a discussion about Christian nationalism and really sort of set the table to say, look, nationalism, that's a pretty big deal. And I don't think it's Christian. I don't love but I'm only just patriotic argument necessarily. It's not my favorite. But if by that you mean I love where I live and I love the people where I live and I want to see them flourish, okay, cool. You can call that patriotic. I'm not going to call anything patriotic for me because patriotic usually has I salute the flag attached to it, or I swear allegiance or oaths to things. Like I mean, the Sermon on the Mount says not to pledge to anything, right? Yeah. Under heaven or earth, do not pledge. It says, do not swear oaths is another translation, but Common English Bible, I think, uses the right word by saying, do not pledge in the Sermon on the Mount. And I think there's real reason that, that matters beyond just sort of the surface sorts of things that we tend to think about. So great topic, dude. I appreciate this, kind of conversation after the conversation I started, and we'll be back at it. We have several episodes of this, and we're going to be needing some like throat lozenges or whatever they're called, right? Like some halls or something after a few more of these because our throats are going to be done. But dude, great to have you part of this conversation again, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This is a blast.
Thanks for listening to Theology Curator. For more resources from Kurt Willems, check out theologycurator.com/newsletter to sign up for our email update list. For new listeners of the podcast, we hope you will subscribe via iTunes, Google, or your podcast manager of choice. If you like what you hear, please leave the show a review. For regular listeners, consider supporting Kurt's online ministry at patreon.com/Kurt Willems. Lastly, please don't let this conversation end when the episode is over. We hope you feel empowered in regular life to explore theology and faith in intelligent and humanizing ways.